Hey, Jason, thank you for coming in to do this interview. You've got an amazing history of contribution and execution, particularly in healthcare. So we're going to mine some of that background, and you're going to share some of your insights because you're doing just amazing work.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. It's nice to see you.
So, Jason, you're doing just tremendous work, particularly at Stanford right now, and with startups and more. What were those inflection points in your life to lead to the wonderful career you have and the contributions you're making? And it could have been something when you were 3 or 5 inside the family, outside the family. It could have been in school, outside school. It could have been different career moves, etc. So, what were those things that were catalysts to what you're doing now and more?
I mean, it's all kind of interwoven there, but it actually goes back to when I was 5 years old. I had a babysitter that had a computer. It was called the Commodore VIC-20, and I started that thing. So I was fascinated by computers, and I think back then you had to specify stop bits and parity to load a file off of a tape. So things were a little bit different back then, but I was really into it, and it just kind of followed me throughout my life. And through kind of high school and up until college, even I was kind of working on little mini projects, so little programming projects all over the place. I remember even just like being in elementary school, and we didn't really have computer labs back then. We actually didn't get that until I was, I think 9 or 10 or something like that. They started to come in. And I would be called down to the office, and I thought I was in trouble, and I had to go fix the computer with the teacher. So I really passionate about it. And just kind of over the years, I've built like different businesses. One around like renting condominiums before we had Airbnb, and you had to do the credit card with the thing like this. And that actually led me to building a payment gateway. I actually built a payment gateway before PayPal was a thing. I built an online school. I built a CMS. I built just like kind of like a whole bunch of different things. But like major inflection points, I think that just kind of that passion has always been with me. And then actually a big one was going to Capilano University. Actually, I at the time, one of your former students, Tom, Tom Maslick had told me about it, and he pushed me over there. And basically, I went because of you, and actually was a big point in my life because I think I was able to get the needed base I needed for kind of moving to the next level. And a big part of that was the like learning a lot more about infrastructure and databases and this kind of thing. So that kind of stepped me towards AC Cancer Agency. And that's where I got into healthcare. So right out of school, I went straight in kind of as an intern. And I kind of the hard way climbed the corporate ladder. I started as a client support analyst, a system administrator, a senior system administrator, a team lead. And like kind of every 2 or 3 years, I would change roles. And I went up to like a enterprise architect at some point. And if I don't know if you recall this or anybody knows this, but all the hospitals in British Columbia at the time were just independent agencies of hospitals. And then health authorities came along, and then those got squished together. And they just kept squishing things together. That kind of experience was amazing for me, right? You don't get you can't teach it in school. And so I was actually spearheading like the identity management of the BC identity used for healthcare. So I helped design all of that. I put in their public key infrastructure, all of this kind of stuff. So it was really like a big point of my life was getting into healthcare. And I think kind of the third big thing was as I was in architecture, I found it really stressful, to be honest. And I ended up changing roles. I ended up going into management in radiation therapy. BC Cancer was struggling with informatics, and they had this role for radiation therapy informatics, the first one I think around, and I went in there, just went straight for it. And for those that don't know, BC Cancer is the largest, I think it's the largest in the world deployment of, there's a vendor called Varian Medical Systems, and they have the largest deployment, largest database, largest geographically separated system. And these are linear accelerators. These are, particle physics and distributed computing and all this kind of stuff. So I was really, again, it lit me up. So that was a big thing in my life. And that's kind of where Stanford found out about me. And that was a big thing. And they kind of dangled the carrot. And I went down to California about 10 years ago. And I started working in the program there. Stanford's known for inventing the linear accelerator and the cyberknife and a few other firsts. And so, yeah, I've been immersed in that. And then after immigration, I was able to climb another couple steps up the ladder. And so now I'm a director and I oversee all of Stanford's medical imaging, the IT part of the medical imaging and radiation therapy, and a few ologies, I call it. There's pathology and these kinds of things these days. So that's kind of what's been my kind of journey so far.
That's really interesting. So you had this really initial curiosity in the Commodore computers and those are really great environments, right? To play and to investigate and be curious or run experiments and gain a lot of skill. And then you end up supporting your schools in their tech requirements or like in their computer usage. And because you have these tech skills, and then you end up going to Capilano University. And I can't recall, were you part of the B Corp program? Which program were you?
Absolutely. I think year 2 or 3 of the B Corp program. That's right.
And was the timing with Lynette Wallach and group?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she was another student right beside me.
Yeah, and she's now a group manager, I think, with Avanade, right?
Exactly.
So both of you have had great career arcs. Are you still in touch with some of those students or your classmates?
Yeah, a few people, and I kind of mostly through LinkedIn kind of connect up through people. But yeah, there's Sun to Go, as he sticks out to me, and Pete Ropchan and those people. So they're all still in computers. They're still doing it, all this time.
But the thing is, with your life, you had this early interest also in entrepreneurship, and like you started companies, you've been part of startups, you're still part of startups, and so that's an interesting journey. And that you did some of the early implementations of the applications of tech in these startups, even before the tech became sort of more broadly used. So like you're like a pioneer.
I feel like that, and that didn't come without its challenges. I tripped over my shoelaces a couple times, but I always had this entrepreneur kind of attitude, and I figured, in my spare time, this is what I do. I go. Some people would go maybe work on cars or go out and I had nature. I really like nature. You can see my background, and computers, and so I ended up just kind of pouring a lot of time into these things and just kind of see what I could do in the world. So yeah.
And then you progressively rose in different, more responsible positions with the BC Cancer sort of work, and then you got the attention of Stanford. How did that happen? Did they reach out to you by email or something, or?
So at that time there was there's a story there. So there was a postdoc that was working at BC Cancer in Victoria. And at the time, we didn't have a lot of support people. Actually, they still don't have a lot of support people, but we really only had 4 or 5 people running the entire provincial cancer system. And someone went on vacation in Victoria, and I had to go over to Victoria. And while I was there was this very frustrated looking gentleman, Dr. Carl Bush. And he was sitting there and he was just kind of really angry at his computer. And I said, like, hey, like, what's up, man? Like, what's going on, right? And he's like, you wouldn't understand. And I said, well, just try me, see what it is. And he had this, he was doing something with distributed computing using Monte Carlo algorithm. And he couldn't get his cluster to work because the DNS settings were like just really complex there, right? So because they got internal DMZs and stuff like this. Like it's all very, very complex. And I said, well, actually it's like this, right? I wrote it out on a napkin. I wrote out like the DNS infrastructure because it's all in my head. I kind of handed it over. I said, if you type these in your little program there, it's going to work. And he typed it in. And after, I think he went like 9 months of frustration trying to get this thing built. And then all of a sudden it just worked. Right. And his face lit up, and he remembered me. So he was actually he's a really bright physicist, and he ended up down at Stanford. And they were struggling with their radiation therapy system at the time. And so, so at some point he gave me a call, and he's like, I heard your system is fast and it works and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, well, yeah, so he said, do you mind if we set up a few people to take a look? Right. And I said, sure, like, why not? We'll have a little, a dog and pony show. Right. And so I thought like maybe 3 people would show up, 30 people show up, right, from California. And I was a little bit nervous at the time, but I kind of, I openly and transparently just shared what I'd done and how I'd done some things. And lots of questions, lots of, an interactive kind of thing for a whole day. And then they ended up sending me a job offer basically after that. And that's kind of how that happened. And it actually happened because I helped somebody.
Yeah, I mean, in the communities I work with, we call that servant leadership, right? And what I was indicating, I don't know if you picked it up, but with some of my colleagues, we call that servant leadership, where you're willing to share and you're in service of others, and ultimately, another gentleman I know, we call that an Omni win, where you win and they win, and you were willing to collaborate, right? And that's a pretty major investment on their part, where they send like 30 people up.
It was incredible. And vendor and physicians and all of it. And I have a strong belief that if you have some value to give, you should try to hand that out and not really expect anything back. So it's one of these many times I've done this that paid off actually for me.
But you were innovating and creating solutions and on the fly with the BC Cancer program, and you were able to be part of a pioneering team of making everything work, and really probably one of the best implementations in the world. And even solving problems at Stanford, they couldn't solve, right? So you get the call and you get a job offer. So what was that like? I mean, it's a new environment. What was your first day like? I mean, you'd have to get acclimatized to that program, how they do things, and what's their operation like compared to what you left in BC?
So I mean, the first thing, U.S. healthcare system versus the Canadian socialized healthcare system is a very different thing. And they have this thing called billing that we don't have in Canada, right? And so I had to kind of learn that. I had to learn a new EMR. Actually very nerve-wracking to change countries, to move your house at all is one thing, but move over a border and bring my family. I have 4 children, so this is a whole thing. I just found it. I was immersed in an area that I really like, and but I was really adamant that I can't fail. I really need to do this well. And there's part of a bit of a fear there that I was going to be like, if I did fail, I'm going back, right? So you make that big change, and so I tried really hard to do the best I could. I still kind of do that, but it was like even more so. And so as I did that, I had been given the task to replace all their hardware and do all this budget stuff, and just, I just sat down and I did the best thing I could, and I consulted with colleagues and everything I could do to just kind of get the best thing I could build. And so actually, the result of that was we ended up having like the fastest distributed computing, system, I think, actually, for radiation therapy, possibly in the world, one of the fastest. And that was a big deal. And also just the environment was super complex. So Canada kind of has like a simplified monolithic architecture. They have this very, big system with 150,000 people on a healthcare system. And then Stanford was more like, like the size of Victoria only, right? And so I was like, oh, this will be a breeze. I was very wrong, right? And I walked in there, and it was just they had one of everything. They had a cyber knife system that I hadn't seen one of those before, which is a a linear accelerator on a robotic arm, right? And it does brain surgery and stuff like that. And it was invented at Stanford. So that even had like challenges of like something called an SGI workstation was used for the first patient. And so the record was on that. Actually, today still have one of those on our network, just so that we can open up that, because the viewer only works inside that machine. And I've even tried to virtualize it. And anyone out in the world that knows how to virtualize one of these things, I would love it. The closest I've gotten was in the video gaming industry, using something called MAME. Somebody hobbyist had made this like IRIX thing. Anyway, so like just really kind of complex environment. And from an imaging perspective, as I've kind of stepped into that even more complexity. And it's kind of like the vendors show up and they're like, have our product, please use it, right? And they want the name on there. But then you get this tech debt, a lot of tech debt. And how do you do that, manage that? So it was a shock. It was actually quite a shock. But I eventually got my feet under me, and we've been doing amazing things ever since. Last year, we put in the world's first PET LINAC, which is a PET CT and a LINAC mushed together. That was a challenge.
I mean, Stanford is so famous, so you're really working on the edge, right? So many different areas, and they'll try it to see. I mean, they'll pilot things that are first of its kind in the world, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And like even in imaging right now, we have an explosion in new technologies. The AI, of course, is there. And we have labs and stuff like that. Lots of algorithms and connecting all that up. But and digital pathology has been kind of we're pushing the lever on that, I think. We're one of the first. So that's a new area. That healthcare, I mean, some of the stuff is like the computers aren't ready for what we want them to do, You have all this regulation and you have all these kind of stuff around it. And then you have like pathology it needs a lot of storage, and that storage has to be fast, and then, and it gets really expensive very fast. And the business model might not make sense for a few years. Right. And then you pioneer through that anyways, that's kind of how it is. The neat place.
Yeah. Do you then interface with other areas within that community? How does that work? Or is it siloed, or is it very kind of collaborative across the different groups within that?
Very open. It's actually very open, and it's kind of being the place that it is. You can kind of just walk into places and throw yourself in. So like for artificial intelligence, for example, like we have the CHAI and stuff like that we're participate in that. And I sit on like an auxiliary kind of group that works on AI for imaging, right? And so I'll participate in that. And so there's kind of a one of everything, and you can really get yourself busy quick if you want to jump into stuff. And I keep it to healthcare. I stay a little bit out of the research side. I help facilitate researchers getting access to things, but I keep it to sort of the operational side of driving all of that, right? That's kind of where I sit. But yeah, it's very open, very, very open.
So I guess the major differences from what you left in BC is that Canada's it's a social system in terms of funding of healthcare. You said it's a monolithic system, and then you come to a system which is not monolithic, and they're trying all sorts of different kinds of things, right, to see what's on the edge and which will work better and faster. And like you said, there's payers in your system, and you have to manage that. And the regulatory environment in the US is very different than the regulatory environment in Canada, right? It's very state-centric, and there's different silos of data, and you have to somehow, data interchange is a headache in the US. And so you'd have to manage all of that. And you're in a leading edge environment, so you'd have to manage that leading edge innovation environment. So that's a lot of things that you've had to manage, right? So
for sure. And we've had we're a security attack target. You can imagine how much that happens. So like, I actually, that was a big shock to me, was just how impressive the security team was at Stanford when I walked in there. I was like, oh, you locked me out of my computer really fast, right? I quickly tried to get myself back into all the access that I needed, but it was just really, yeah, shocking in that sense, right? The technology, the innovation, the people, no knocking to my Canadian colleagues, right? But because of Stanford's name, I think they recruit some of the world's best people. And I had a web problem one day, and I walked down and talked to the web manager, and the web manager was this like super accomplished, person. And I was like, oh, wow, this is refreshing, right? Just not, you didn't have to start at the beginning and walk people through and do this whole thing. I was used to that. And he was like, no, this is what you do. And, he just knew it, and so you move faster. And it was almost like the stuff Canada did really, really well, we do poorly, and inversely, right? And then we had the inverse going on. And that was kind of an interesting thing that it jumped out at me when I was doing this transition. Yeah.
In your environment, then are you constantly taking courses and stuff then to try to keep up?
Yeah, I'm not, well, I take probably 5 or 6 courses a year on stuff, just trying to do it. My approach is always just kind of find the problem, and I'll learn as I go, right? And so I do software development and stuff like that. And actually, one of my startups is around integrating disparate data in radiation therapy, right? So I have this company that started, it's very young, called Data Knife. And I actually developed at Stanford in year 2 that I was there, a solution that would take CyberKnife data, and it would kind of normalize it. Because like I was saying, we have this SGI, and we have like all these different versions of software over the years. And so the patient records kind of in all these different spots and different formats. And so I was like, well, why don't we like make a tool to kind of make a continuous record? So I built all that out. And then I found quickly that, oh, this thing does documentation. You can use it for research, right? And so we started like adding features to it. And then recently, Stanford actually signed the intellectual property to me, so for commercial purposes. So I can actually go sell it and give them a copy kind of thing. And so I've started building this out as a kind of more robust product that is going to reach across multiple kind of treatment modalities that we have. So that there's different, vendors doing different things. And just kind of tapping into that experience of mine of like being able to play with all that. I've just basically I got a generation 2 of this product that is hopefully hot off the presses in about 5 months. We're still working on a few things, but yeah, it's been kind of cool.
There's a ranking by PitchBook where they ranked all of the universities in the world, or they looked at the major universities in the world, and they ranked them based on the number of founders that sort of came out of those universities, and Stanford's number 1.
That does not shock me at all. And I'm in that, right? So you can imagine a lot of these people also like come to the IT team to deploy their solution that they made, that we get into things sometimes, we got to be careful with it. It's like I say, that tech debt is there, and we have like amazing solutions that come, but sometimes we'll have like a product or a solution that we only need like one little piece of that. And we're really trying to be more enterprise thinking and kind of, do we really need that? Is that, helping us? Cause you got to patch it and monitor it and upgrade it, all that kind of stuff, but it becomes a bit unwieldy.
So, there's a lot of people in my audience who work in different institutions, and they work in different enterprises, and they may be entrepreneurial, but it's not a friendly environment to be entrepreneurial. It sounds like your environment is very friendly if you're an entrepreneur as well. So you can have startups that you're working with at the same time that you're doing your job. So how is that managed? What does that look like in your environment?
I honestly think that is the current leadership that we have in our environment is open to this and likes the idea of allowing people to kind of be free to explore and develop, as long as it doesn't kind of impact your regular job, if you will. And previously, it wasn't necessarily always like that. So currently, it's open. But also, we're also kind of we're in a spot where I think software development is becoming kind of more and more important as things move on, especially in healthcare. And the teams and structures of these teams are not built that way. They're not into DevOps. They don't really understand that. And so we're kind of struggling with kind of moving into that phase. And I do that, but I can't expect everybody to be there. I have a team of 33 people, and there's probably 5 people that could, quickly jump into that. But it's kind of it's a real challenge, actually. It's open, it's collaborative. They give you a long rope, do with it as you will. But I'm trying to make baskets with mine. But yeah, it's an environment that innovation is supported. Being collaborative is supported. And teaching others and all of this. It's a teaching environment too, right? So you have this kind of high level of I don't know. It's almost a unified environment, if you will, where everybody's kind of thinking and working together. It's wonderful, actually. It's neat.
Because I do so many of these interviews, I guess over 100 this year, and sometimes they have to check with their communications department and their PR people, and sometimes the PR people and the communications people are actually on the same interview. They just turn their cameras off. It sounds like this is pretty seamless for you to do the interview.
Yeah, I feel comfortable. I really do. I feel the support of my leadership that I have. And yeah, they've been really kind and open. And I have some history of not messing up so much. Yes. So I think there's some trust there for sure. But it's they are very supportive.
Yeah, well, that's really, really, really great to hear. Can you talk about some of the innovation areas that you're looking at right now at Stanford Healthcare in the imaging and radiology side? Do some of your members of your team attend some of the conferences or ones that you'd recommend so that you're right there looking at the latest things and trying to implement it? What's exciting for you that can act as a beacon for the audience of things that you're already doing or looking at that they should start looking at as well?
Well, I would say from a conference perspective, we kind of attend them all. It feels like there's a big focus on that. And actually, some members of my team help organize. There's a conference called SIM, SIIM. And so there's members of my team that actually help organize the conference. They're actually, right in there. The association for the AAPM, there's the Astro for medical physics. There's basically name a medical conference. There's someone from Stanford's probably going to show up and do something with it. But from the IT perspective, we're right embedded in there. The kind of the stuff that we're dealing with and working on right now is we have a very highly complex environment. And it's hard to describe when you're inside to somebody on the outside of it. But like one of the things we have to deal with is there's a concept called IOCM, or image object change management. And so, you get a modality that scans an image and it passes through. We use something called the DICOM unifier, DICOM router, and it actually sends down to, maybe to your PACS, traditionally. And then it gets read by a radiologist, they dictate a report, and then you're done. But not us, right? So we take that and we have 30 or 40 ancillary systems where this will go out. Some of them are AI, some of them are doing like image enhancement, some stuff like this. And it may get annotated in these different systems by different people. And then that goes back into the PACS, and then that gets archived. And so later when another physician comes along and it says, I need to see the prior of this patient's study, I have to make sure I show the right thing. And I might have 40 copies of this thing, right? So we have this very complex kind of problem to deal with in our data flows. And that's kind of like one of our big challenges from an innovative perspective. I mean, it's all you hear about these days is AI at the end of the day. So, and it's really exciting. I think we need it. I see it as like a sidekick or for the radiologists and stuff, where you have the AI tool will come along and say like, oh, I found an incidental finding in this image. Did you see it? And more often than not, the radiologist is beating the AI and the quality's better and all of this kind of stuff. But that seems to be kind of, ever changing, as you very well know. So my challenge is then, well, now I have all these tools that are doing the AI. So not only do I have the change management problem, I also have, well, what do I show to the radiologist? Like, we're going to exhaust them having to read a bunch of stuff maybe they didn't need to read. They could have just looked at the image. And so, like, how do you show all that stuff and create value, but also, give that patient the best experience they could, right? So that's kind of been a challenge, but something to keep an eye on. And then the other one that's kind of really I mentioned it earlier, is digital pathology. And so I'm just going to switch this here. Sorry, I get distracted very easily. I switch to do not disturb. Digital pathology is kind of an emerging market for us. And it was originally inside of our lab team, but because of the heavy imaging component, we ended up kind of taking it on. And it's going from glass slides to what's kind of like a Google map, right? And the pathologist will drill in and like find, do their thing all digitally. And we have warehouses of slides and all this kind of stuff. So the challenge that we're having is it's really expensive to store all that data and get access to it and keep up with just the volume of Stanford. So I can imagine like a bigger healthcare system, if they wanted to deploy something like this, would really struggle, because they would have to deal with like, we have the fastest IO we can throw at it, and it can't keep up at times, right? So we have to like kind of be ahead of it a bit and almost throttle back and say, hold on, where's our capacity and stuff like that. So we're learning like ways to manage it and communicate on it. And then you got to educate people, right? So you're dealing with this like new technologies as they come out, and then you have to kind of also show people like how do they work, and like, here's what we found, and keeping up with all of that. So it is actually endless. It just keeps going and going. There's like rabbit holes everywhere to go down, and you can kind of pick your way. Radiation therapy is more kind of moving toward the AI that I see there has been around for years. Actually, it's been around for decades. There's auto planning and auto contouring, and this kind of stuff keeps evolving. But really looking at things to like optimize patient plans to really maximize dose to tumor targets and reduce dose to healthy tissue and this kind of stuff. And also like we're seeing like sort of emerging things that we're doing with like our quality assurance and stuff like that, and building in for documentation. And it's kind of like that, right? And so yeah, and the other thing that we're really seeing in that area is the machine technology has come a long ways. So the accelerators themselves, we're seeing these hybrid MRI Linacs and CT Linacs and this kind of stuff that are coming out, which is, so it's really cool actually to play with these things because they're really expensive and nobody just has one lying around, and we kind of have one of each, And so it's an informatics nightmare, if you will, because they're all disjoined. But yeah, I probably didn't directly answer it, but yeah, we're at all the conferences. We are participating, both kind of speaking and consuming at all of them, alongside our physician friends, essentially. But the IT piece of that is the informatics track actually probably needs a little work. Now I'm thinking out loud here. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd be interested to know that, I mean, there's so much excitement over generative AI, right? And I mean, even Stanford produces, open source models and things like that, and LLMs, large foundation models, large language models, right? So what are your sort of plans on the integration of some of that tech, especially on the large foundation models, large language models?
We started in on it, as you can imagine. So we have our own like secure version of GPT that we host to kind of allow us to kind of work with patient data, right? Because it's all private, and so we keep that internal. We did a couple pilots. They're semi-famous, but one was working with Microsoft Nuance and Epic, which is the big EMR vendor, and basically had the AI in the room listening, transcribing, and writing notes for the physicians, and that was very successful. We did it with 3.5 and 4 GPT, and the results were obviously really, really good for the version 4, but 3.5 not so much. But and that comes with its challenges, right? Because we're having, there's always AI is always biased, and so then how do you use this in a healthcare setting so that it's fair and equitable and this kind of stuff? We're using not so much using large language models and imaging, just in the dictation side, where the radiologist is writing a report and it might see something in the pixel data that isn't correct in the report, and it kind of comes in and does a few suggestions and this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's also so very new and the shiny new toy, and so, but we're being very careful about how we use that. We don't just roll it out. We're just kind of doing things on a very structured approach to everything, right? So,
I mean, the GPT-4 Omni came out. There is Cloud 3.5, which seems like it's got some phenomenal capabilities, right? And it's just a mid model. It's not their high-end model, but they've iterated. And Omni seems interesting. They haven't widely released it, and they're trying to put, safety rails and stuff on it. The vision capabilities of some of this stuff, right? Where it can actually in real time look and analyze and give you feedback, and you can sort of in real time interact with that. And that's just this year. And then you see people thinking that there is some, every time you scale, you're getting more capabilities, and that scaling seems to continue. So now I can see when I'm looking at some of the work that's coming up, maybe they're thinking that the scaling, it's not scaling, and the new kind of capabilities are not matching to that scaling as fast now. So maybe they're thinking it could be 2 or 3 years out to get sort of the ultimate, capabilities, and sort of reduce the hallucination aspect of this. But do you have access to the full Omni with the vision that OpenAI sort of circulated around, but they're only doing it to sort of limited people right now? It's like even pre-alpha, I think.
I personally don't have access, but I would not be shocked if we did. It's just, there's just so much going on. It's hard to keep up with, right? And actually in my area, what I'm seeing is not necessarily with the large language model stuff, but with pixel data, and actually working with like MRIs and CTs and X-rays and that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of a whole different thing going on. It's a different thing to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, there was just this big conference that completed, right, in the vision area. It's a research conference, but I'm sure, well, there would definitely be people at Stanford presenting papers there.
Absolutely.
Do people on the IT infrastructure side attend some of these things because you're in imaging, right? So
yeah, so we do. Actually, we totally do. We're right there. We actually have a data science team that is kind of overseeing all of our AI, and we kind of participate in the conferences, but also like the organizations that keep it like really bringing ethics into this, and we're trying not to beat ourselves up because we feel like it's only been a year, but it's like, well, we gotta work on it, right? And I mean, we see there's problems there that we not just like how AI can help, but like when it doesn't work in a really bad way. And so, like, for example, a lot of the data we used for, like, in dermatology, we have the ability to kind of look at like a picture of your skin, and it'll kind of tell you your conditions really, really quickly. but it doesn't work with darker skinned people, right? And so, like, well, how do we fix that, right? And I kind of feel like it's a societal problem essentially that needs to be kind of addressed at the root of all of that. And Stanford's a wonderful place that's open and talks about this and allows you to kind of make that change, right? Be part of that change. So we're all kind of thinking about that, and trying to kind of share with like ethical use of AI, and also how do you assess AI, and um, how do you like measure if it's drifting and all this kind of stuff, because that becomes really more and more important in a healthcare setting than maybe elsewhere, right? So when people's lives are at stake, you need to be able to measure kind of how accurate this stuff is over time.
You got some amazing people at Stanford. For example, John Hennessy, who's now president emeritus, and he's won the Turing Award because of his work on chip technology, risk technology, right? And he has set up that amazing leadership scholarship, the Hennessy with the Nike founder, right? The Knight Hennessy Leadership Scholarship, and he's an investor in companies and things like, and chair of Alphabet. Do you, because the way Stanford is organized, do you get any kind of interaction with these Nobel Prize winner kind of people, or award winners, or is it just too large and you just don't ever get to even have a chat with some of these world famous people there?
Well, it's kind of interesting, right? You're going to brush shoulders with people as you're walking around there. And I'll say, and I won't say his name, but I've had like a Nobel Prize winner for dinner at my house because his grandson plays with my kid, right? And so it's kind of a weird thing. And then they want to play or whatever, and like he comes over, and so like, well, let's make dinner, let's chat, let's hang out, right? So it's kind of like a unique environment because you were there, right? And Palo Alto in general is also kind of like this. You have kind of people from all different industries, but it's a melting pot of these like
right
super IT people. So yeah, I mean, I get the opportunity to meet someone pretty much every week, and I'm always blown away by these amazing people, right? I'm not worthy to be around you, I feel sometimes, but it's um I don't know. I try to pick up stuff from them. I try to like, well, learn a bit, learn as much as I can, and see where I can help. And it's an amazing thing. Yeah.
But ultimately, they're people.
Yeah. We're all people.
Yeah, they're all people, and that's what I find, because I'm in a lot of peer-to-peer kind of conversations with investors and CEOs and people who have these amazing backgrounds, but ultimately they're people, right? So, and everybody has a contribution to make, right?
I totally agree, and very human, right? We're not talking like weird personalities or anything. They're just like you and me, just have a conversation with people and walk up, and I actually naturally very introverted myself, but over the years I'm of a growth mindset, and so I kind of lean into discomfort a lot and handle it, right? And so part of that has been just kind of putting myself next to these people and talking, and it always turns out a lot better than I thought it did somehow in my head. So good advice for anyone out there to lean into your discomfort a bit.
Yeah, in fact, that's a good recommendation to the audience. How this growth mindset, as you mentioned, this approach, being on the outlier part of who you are, and stretch goals, I guess, be it on the boundary, and that's how you learn, that's how you grow, and living to a certain degree outside of your comfort zone. So, and it sounds, well, your career definitely is a model for that. We don't have a lot of time left, and unfortunately, I have another interview coming up as well. So, some areas that I want to briefly touch on. I mean, because Stanford is such a leader. You're a leader in AI and machine learning. You're a leader in chip technologies. In fact, I did an interview with Philip Wong. I would consider him probably the best person in the world in advanced chip technologies, the chief scientist at Taiwan Semiconductor. I mean, just amazing guy. In fact, I did a Forbes article on him as well. I did 2 interviews with him.
Wow.
And I've done interviews with John Hennessy too with John, right? Um, because you're at the forefront of chip technology and you're forefront of things like supercomputing and where that's going, because it's exascale now, and you'll have the top researcher in quantum computing there. And at MIT just came out with this new kind of quantum technology and biomedical innovation, right? You're in healthcare, but there's the biomedical part, and then Stanford will be a leader in that area. And there's just so many of these areas. Do you have any viewpoints on some of these topic areas like chip technology, where we talk about AI machine learning? In fact, even in AI machine learning, do you think it's going to go to AGI in 2 years? You know, this kind of amazing capability. Um, quantum computing, do you think, where do you think that's going? And also biomedical innovation, aging, they're working on aging and other things. You see AlphaFold 3 came out where they're able to model how amino acids fold into hundreds of millions of proteins, but also show the interaction or predict the interaction between proteins, enzymes, RNA, DNA, ligands, things like that. So things that were thought to be impossible are now being done. So some of these really edge areas, your views on some of those, and then a little bit about your work with your startups, and then I'd like to end up with some recommendation when I get to the audience. And we got about 10 minutes. So
I'll do my best. So it's a great question. So we'll start with the researchers. You know, I love my research friends, and they're out there innovating. They generally like invent these great technologies, and then they call someone like me and say, go plug it in, right? To make it work, right? And it's very tough actually, because there's no thought into actually the deployment of it. They're more focused on the technology itself and maybe not so much on how this is going to be sustainable. Will AGI be here? I think way sooner than we think, honestly, in my opinion. I think it's going to show up. We base our prediction of the future is based on what we experienced in the past, right? And I look at my cell phone, I'm like, well, that was very not that long ago. That these little devices, you know, now you're holding all this compute in your hand, and so it's a really incredible thing. I think it's going to be here really quickly. Quantum computing, I got a chance to see that one of the first quantum computers at a Microsoft conference in 2019, I think it was, at Ignite in Florida. And I was instantly like, I ran over to the thing. I'm taking pictures of it, and it was just looked so strange to me, right? You had this like this tank that brings the temperature down to like 4 Kelvin and has all these wires in it. I'm like, this is not a computer, but it's a computer. And you have this like hybrid of doctors and physicists and IT people coming together just to solve this, right? And I think it's going to be incredibly disruptive, especially in like my areas, because I'm doing very traditional. Originally, it was like CPU distributed computing, and now GPU distributed computing, and something like quantum is going to show up. Well, you know, if you're doing particle physics, what kind of tool do you want, right? It's going to be awesome, right? So I'm actually looking forward to it. I started to try to get my Q sharp skills going, because I think you can kind of play around with that a little bit, but focus more in other areas. But yeah, for my research friends, please like think about some security and think about things. I kind of a funny story, and I only got a short time, but like the original CyberKnife, the first day they plugged that into the network, they used the broadcast node to actually control the robot, right? And so they plug it into the network, and you had like this broadcast storm that just took down the whole hospital system, right? It just wasn't ready for it, right? And so, you know, these kind of learnings, it keeps happening. It keeps kind of happening when these new technologies come out. Like there's this kind of, oh yeah, we got the new technology, but like it wasn't really thought out too much how it was actually going to plug into like maybe a business setting or to a healthcare setting, with all the safety and rigor around that and the regulation around all of that. So that's kind of a bit of a challenge area, but I would be awesome if people would kind of keep the innovation going, but also think about kind of where you're going with it, especially if you're going to sell it. You're gonna need to deal with it anyways. Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of just see more and more of this stuff around. being in the melting pot, like I said, I'm asked to plug it in, make it work. And so we've taken a very kind of like a systematic approach to it, where we're like, okay, does it have AI or not, right? And so if it does have AI, we do this full kind of fairness usability assessment that really looks at like how we're going to keep it up to date and this kind of stuff. And then we're going to go down the path of like the traditional infrastructure thing. So our approach has been to really look at what's coming at us, and then we like to have like a nice like checkbox system to kind of bring this stuff in and then carry it into it so that it's safe for people to use. And yeah, and so I don't know. I hopefully I'm answering that. I forget sometimes what the question is, and I definitely want to talk a little bit about one of my other startups if it's all right.
Yeah. So tell me very briefly. You got about 2 minutes to talk about your various startups.
I love it. So I talked about one, the data knife. The second one that I'm really passionate about is much further along. It's called Dianima, and Dianima is it's based on some science that took 10 years to develop out of Spain. And so what it is it's looking at personalities of people, and in particular, we adopted it to a healthcare setting where it's looking at the personality of a physician and the personality of a patient, and helping have the conversation between the patient and the doctor, and showing these are the words you need to use. So it essentially, you can imagine like you and I will have two different personalities, and if we were to approach a patient, they have a different personality, and it teaches the person, the physician, how to talk to them in a way that works with your personality, if that makes sense, right? And so, and like your doctor will say, right, you go eat well and exercise, and then nobody does it. So we're trying to like figure out, well, how do you improve adherence and affinity in the relationship with the doctor? And we've got it running in 5 different pilots across the planet right now. And it's been very promising. We've seen a lot of really positive outcomes. Everyone that's using it is suddenly their patients are listening to them, and we're getting great outcomes, right? So I'm really excited about it. We're at a point right now where we have a product that is out, and I'm just kind of working on V2 of that. But I'm looking around if anyone is interested in it. I don't know how they reach me, but we're trying to find people that would be interested in investing in it and helping us take it up to the level.
I mean, they could reach you with the LinkedIn. They could say, I saw the interview and I'm interested in working with you or collaborating or something. Yeah. And I guess then with these startups, you have equity too. So you're a part owner, right?
That's correct. Yeah. I own a percentage of both. And yep, that's part of the deal.
So Jason, you could end up being like the founders of Google.
Yeah.
Just came to Stanford, right? So
yeah, exactly. I met a couple of them in passing.
And then I could say, hey, I actually taught.
Yeah. Well, yeah, honestly, Stephen, you were a huge influence. Like I said, you were one of the big parts of my career, and your unorthodox teaching style is still, it's ingrained in here. You may not believe it, but move, same, retain, right? Like I remember that it's screamed into my head, and I don't forget that, and I love it. I really do. I really appreciate like all you've done. I don't think you needed to teach people, but you did. You went out and you really built a generation of people that are the next people in the IT world. And you're an amazing guy. I know you hear it all the time, but like really, I'm really grateful to have ever met you.
Well, I'm grateful to have this interview with you and to hear your career arc and it continues, and you got startups as well. I mean, sort of it's unbounded, right? The possibilities. And this is our last question, and that is, what final recommendations would you like to leave my audience, or what questions would you like to leave my audience, or both? So.
Well, I mean, I think if you're out there and you're wondering if you can take it on or you can do it, don't worry about it. Just do it. and let that other stuff kind of settle where it settles. You can take it on, you can do it, you can find time. That you might have to maybe watch a little less Netflix to work on your thing, but that's okay, right? And so that's my little advice, is that, like, just don't walk away from it. If it's if you're thinking about it all the time, then maybe there's something there, and you really, don't regret it, and try it, and I think that's an important thing, that is, you can, make the decision and it's wrong, or you can make the decision and it's right, or you can do the worst thing, which is don't make the decision at all.
Yeah, I guess there's this idea of stepwise refinement, which when I used to teach programming logic, you got a big problem, just break it up, chop it up.
Yeah, break it into pieces and just take that first step. Exactly.
Yeah, you got to take that first step and just keep iterating, right? So
yeah,
which you are doing. You're such a great example of this continuous iteration, right? So, Jason, amazing career, just amazing what you're doing, huge contributions to the entire ecosystem. You're a model for others, you're a beacon, you're a North Star for others to follow. And thank you for coming in and sharing some of your insights with our audience.
Really appreciate it, and wishing you very, very much wonderful prospects in the future. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.